He wrestled with God all night long. It wasn't a mystical vision, but a brutal struggle in the mud, and God demanded to be released before dawn. Genesis chapter 32 describes deep footprints etched into the muddy bank of the Jabbok River, and a brutal physical struggle that lasted without pause until dawn. What exactly was the figure that wrestled with Jacob in the dark, leaving him with a limp for the rest of his earthly life? In this episode, we'll delve into the original Hebrew manuscripts and ancient Middle Eastern rabbinic traditions to identify the mysterious desert assailant. The biblical narrative presents an immediate theological paradox regarding the identity of this nocturnal being. The original Hebrew text, in its first mention on the scroll, simply calls the intruder a man. There are no glorious wings described in the ancient manuscripts, no celestial light shining in the darkness of the narrow valley, just the harsh sound of bodies colliding, gasping breaths, and physical exertion on the dry earth. Yet the strength of this mysterious aggressor completely transcends the limitations of human biology. With a single silent touch, without using brute force, he dislocates the patriarch's hip joint. When the struggle finally ends and the sun rises, Jacob unequivocally declares that he saw God himself face to face. But centuries later, the prophets of Israel who recorded the story would call this formidable opponent an angel. The true identity of the figure remains hidden beneath the outright refusal to reveal his own name during the combat, a millennial secret guarded alongside the permanent scar on the patriarch's flesh. The scar on Jacob's thigh was the undeniable physical reminder of a man trapped between the ghosts of his past and the absolute terror of his future. The patriarch was returning to the land of Canaan after 20 long years of forced exile on the plains of Padan Aram in ancient Mesopotamia. He had fled his father's tent in his youth, soon after usurping the patriarchal blessing from his elder brother, Esau the hunter. Now the reconnaissance messengers he had sent returned with devastating news. Esau was marching towards him, leading a militia of 400 armed men. Panic seized the itinerant camp. On that cold night in the valley, Jacob strategically divided his family, his servants, and his immense flocks. He sent everyone to the relative safety of the other bank of the Jabbok River, a tributary of swift waters and slippery stones that flows into the Jordan River. The patriarch remained completely alone on the eastern bank of the river, a solitary figure wrapped in his raw wool cloak, awaiting dawn and the potential massacre of his entire lineage. It was precisely at this moment of psychological isolation and extreme physical vulnerability that the surprise attack occurred. The Masoretic manuscripts that preserve the story don't describe a mystical vision, a deep dream during sleep, or a prophetic trance. The specific Hebrew verb used by the ancient author on the parchment is avak, an extremely rare term in the scriptures that literally means to raise dust, to roll on the ground grappling with someone in combat. It was an authentic, sweaty, exhausting, and life-threatening hand-to-hand struggle for Jacob. The unknown aggressor didn't use bronze swords, didn't utter majestic divine speeches, nor did he announce himself with celestial trumpets.
He simply emerged from the shadows and attacked Yaakov in the silence of the early morning, forcing Yaakov to fight desperately for his very survival. Yaakov's resistance was unusual and fierce for a man of his advanced age. He wrestled for hours on end, refusing to yield ground or be immobilized in the darkness of the muddy valley. The physical tension of the narrative reaches its absolute peak as the eastern sky begins to lighten and the mysterious aggressor demands to be released before the sun rises on the horizon. However, when the first light of morning illuminates the flowing waters of the Jabbok, the nature of the combat changes inexplicably and definitively. The man who wrestled in the dust extends his hand and touches Yaakov's hip joint, and with a simple supernatural movement destroys the patriarch's mobility forever. If the opponent was merely a created being, why does Yaakov claim to have seen the Creator's face? And if it was God himself, how did a mortal survive direct physical combat? Ancient rabbinic tradition attempted to resolve this complex exegetical conflict by identifying the aggressor as a highly specific and fearsome angelic entity. Classic Jewish interpretive texts, such as the Targum and the vast Midrash collections, suggest that Yaakov wrestled with the guardian angel of the nation of Edom, Esau's celestial representative. Other influential medieval commentators diverged. Rashi saw a celestial emissary testing the patriarch before his greatest earthly challenge, while Maimonides argued that the struggle was a prophetic vision, not physical combat. This purely angelic interpretation finds direct and literal support in the prophet Hosea in chapter 12 of his prophetic book. Hosea explicitly writes in the scrolls that Yaakov wrestled with an angel, prevailed against him, and wept, seeking his favor on the riverbank. But the original text of the book of Genesis carries a profound theological anomaly that challenges this simple linear reading. The aggressor tells Yaakov that he wrestled with God and with men and prevailed. And Yaakov, gasping, bruised, and covered in damp earth, names that exact piece of desert with the word Peniel. In ancient Hebrew, the term Peniel literally means the face of God. The patriarch justifies the choice of name by recording a theological assertion that was bold and dangerous for the era. He claims that he saw God face to face and his life was saved. This echoes the ancient Middle Eastern belief that no human being could see the true form of God and live. This uncompromising duality between the figure of a subordinate messenger and the presence of the divine being itself forced scholars to look beyond common translations. The ancient Hebrew word inscribed in Hosea's scrolls for angel, malach, holds the fundamental historical key to understanding the figure in the desert. In the ancient Middle East, a malach was essentially a messenger or an envoy. It could be an ordinary human emissary carrying a letter from a king, or a celestial envoy fulfilling an order on the physical plane. But the early Hebrew theology documents a singular, recurring, and mysterious figure known as the angel of the Lord, the Malach Yahweh. When this specific messenger appears in crucial scriptural narratives, the dividing line between sender and sent almost completely vanishes within the text. This happened identically with Moses in the desert of Midian decades later. The text of the book of Exodus records that the angel of the Lord appeared in the flames of the burning bush, but in the very next verse, it is God himself who speaks from the midst of the fire with absolute authority. The ancient Jewish legal and cultural concept known as shaliach establishes that the commissioned agent sent by a master carries the full authority and representative presence of the master himself. But early Christian commentators, writing in the first centuries of the Roman Empire, went far beyond this purely legal or metaphorical representation. Ancient theologians of immense influence, such as Justin Martyr in the 2nd century and Tertullian later, documented the conviction that the being at the Jabbok River was not a created angel acting by proxy. They argued exhaustively through textual analysis that it was a real physical theophany, or more specifically in Christian theology, a Christophany, a historical manifestation of the pre-incarnate divine Word, assuming a tangible and temporary human form to interact directly with his creation in space and time. This perfectly explains the enigmatic refusal of the figure to reveal a name during the struggle on the earth. When the exhausted Jacob asks who he is, the figure responds only with another evasive question: "Why do you ask my name?"
The silence regarding his exact identity was the only possible answer in that early morning. The divine name was too sacred to be uttered in the dust of battle, and the nature of that being was too incomprehensible to be reduced to a simple word from human vocabulary. The dust finally settling on the riverbank revealed a man physically broken, yet permanently transformed in his essence and destiny. The mysterious figure of the early morning didn't leave a name to be invoked in the future, but left a new identity forged in pain for the patriarch. Jacob, whose original name meant the deceiver, or he who grasps the heel, came to be officially called Israel, an ancient and powerful Hebrew name that carries the literal meaning of he who struggles with God. The unresolved mystery of Peniel is not an editing flaw in the ancient Hebrew text, but its central theological message documented for future generations. The creator of the universe didn't use his infinite power to destroy the patriarch on his night of greatest fear and vulnerability. Instead, the texts suggest he accommodated his own unfathomable immensity into a restricted physical form that Jacob could endure and face equally in the dust of the earth. The permanent scar on Israel's hip joint became the undeniable proof that the nocturnal encounter was real, anchoring the experience of the divine in the fragility of human flesh. In our next episode, we'll investigate Rahab, the prostitute who saved a nation, the Canaanite woman whose red cord in the window changed the lineage of the kings of Israel. Only the ancient waters of the Jabbok River continue flowing in the same millennial stone bed, guarding absolute silence about the night when the dust of the earth touched the unspeakable.